everyone in that organization is waiting for one of, if not the very best receiver to step on the field and unload on this game this week.
We did it! We made it through the off season, and now it's the season, and there will be games starting tonight, and then tomorrow, and then a lot on Sunday, and then one on Monday. It is regular season time. Welcome to the SumerSports Show. Lindsay Rhodes and Thomas Dimitrov, geeked out of our minds. I am geeked out of my mind. This is like Christmas for me.
I am so fucking geeked out right now. I'm telling you. I had to throw the expletive in there. I know no one wants me to swear. I represent
who?
The reality is anyone watching football gets that way, right? Let's just like pull it all out here. Let's take it to another level. I'm excited that you're so excited. LR, let's roll. I mean, let's start talking real football now. Not preseason. Can't wait.
No. Preseason, shmee-season, we're going to get into the real goods. These games are going to count in the standings. I'll be at back to school night for kickoff night, but that's a separate story. I need to write a letter to somebody at the school board about who in the hell came up with that as the day that we should do this, but whatever. Let's talk about so we're excited. What about the GMs that are, I'm curious about, this is a position that you've been in, you put together your roster, you do all the moves in the offseason, free agency, you've plugged some of the holes that were problems last year, and now it's about to actually, like, you're sending your baby out into the world. We're all going to judge it. What is the day of game like as you just count down the hours, minutes until that ball kicks off?
Well, look, we all know going into the season, preseason's one thing, but until you get into the regular season game, until you're ready to play for real, that's where your head is. And a lot of people say, and I think I mentioned this before, oh, you just kick your feet up as a GM, you're ready to roll forward. You're more like fired up. These waves of emotion, and we'll get into that in a little bit, are unbelievable, right? All you want is to make sure that you kick off your season with all your moves made as a general manager, that they're hitting in stride. They don't have to be great. They just can't be They just can't be the moves that are the wah move. Like, oh no, did this really happen? Did we truly make a mistake? Look, general managers, most of them have a really good idea of what they are expecting going into the season, and it rarely happens that way, right? So you just have to be agile. You have to be mobile. You have to be understanding of certain things, Lindsay. I get that. But remember, when you're paying a lot of money, when your owner's looking at you and he's saying, sure, 120, 150, 200 plus $1 million on this player, you take a deep gulp and you just pray every day of the season that you're not going to have made a mistake on that.
Or that, that guy isn't going to drop back on the first series of the game and tear his Achilles. Like, maybe you're thinking that. Maybe you're like, please don't do that.
Who would have thunk, as they say? No, I look about that. I mean, that is something that's on my mind. You don't think Joe Douglas is going into his first game of this season thinking he loves Aaron. He thinks Aaron Rodgers is going to come in and praise that he's going to rip it up. And I'm hopeful for them that he does as well. I'm a big fan of Joe Douglas and what he does there in that organization. But the quarterback has to step on the field and be healthy for more than a few plays. We know that. I've said this too. I think Aaron Rodgers is one of the very best who ever played this game. I hope for them that he's going to hit stride. I've heard very positive things out of their camp. But again, you just pray that nothing goes awry there and the other Achilles or whatever that may be doesn't surface, of course.
Yeah, and maybe also if you're Joe Douglas that Hassan Reddick shows up. But, we're getting into the many layers of what Joe Douglas might have anxiety about these days. You know what we talk about in the past, like you hear a lot about player superstitions and what their day is like getting ready for the game, particularly if it's a later day, a later in the day game. Did you ever do any like kind of routine type things? Do you have nerves? Do you have like, what were those days like for you? Paint me a picture.
No, look, I was a big, I always had to get my chi going, right? It was about proper fitness. It was about proper deep breathing. I'm not being hokey about it, but like I needed to make sure that there was consistency in my day leading up to these first games, whether that was fitness, whether they were long rides, whatever they were, eating properly. The last thing I want to do is eat a whole bunch of pancakes and a whole bunch of sugar muffins or whatever it was. And all of a sudden I do this peak and then I just fall I needed to be alert. And that was one of the things that I thought about, make sure that I was on top of it and I wasn't just eating bonbons before I went in. Or what happens when you're in there at halftime in your owner's suite, a lot of times, there's unbelievable food. And you have to be careful that you manage that correctly. I know it's a little funny aside, but it is important to make sure you're on top of your world that way, if that's what matters to you.
Wait, you're gonna have to back me up there. So you're in Arthur Blank's suite. There's a lot of food. Like, why is this worth mentioning? Like, what's going on here?
I'm just saying, when you're going in, you want to be clear of mind. And if you're one of
Okay.
those people that eat well and you're about fitness and you're about making sure that you're healthy and your mind is acute, we know that in today's world. Acute minds have everything to do with making sure your sugar isn't out of the top end, flying off the edge of the world. You need to be monitoring that. A lot of these young GMs, I think, are a lot more fit than the old schoolers, right? And I think they're much more mindful of how they want to go in and be clear of mind. That's why I'm bringing that up. I just think when you go in, you want to go into your day one, game one, clear, and that's a good way to kick it off because it sets the tone for the rest of the games. Again, not everyone is into that. I get it, but we all have ways. Some people, would rather sleep in late. Some people would rather go through document after document. Some people even watch video the day of a game. That was one of the things I did not do. I wanted to focus on the game. Yeah.
Is that a distraction technique, you think?
It
Like,
might be
let
a
me do
distraction
something
technique. Yes.
productive, so I'm not just sitting here freaking out, being nervous. I'm talking about general managers and their emotions. I want to ask you about a clip from the last Hard Knocks from the Bears. There was a clip that it made me get emotional watching it. And that was of Ryan Poles breaking the news to Adrian Colbert that he was getting cut. Did you see that clip?
I did.
What did you think? Anything about that you related to in any way? Was there any one specific player that you remember from your time as being particularly hard to have that conversation with?
Again, dichotomous emotions, right? The excitement about moving forward, putting your team together, making those categorical cuts that need to happen. That's the positive side. That's where you're thinking, okay, we've put together the best team that we can put together. The human side, however, is what Ryan showed in that clip and what most of us have experienced numerous times. I can go on and on about it. It is a very uncomfortable time when you're looking them in the eye, them being the player, someone that you care for, someone that you have a great deal of respect for, someone that has traveled an incredible journey to get there, right? My experience with that, it wasn't necessarily at training camp. It happened to be 2 years later, but I do think it's worth mentioning. We drafted a player in the 5th round in the early years when I was in Atlanta. His name was Kerry Meyer. Kerry was a receiver at the University of Kansas, top notch in so many ways, right? 5 days, Lindsay, before he signed on with us and we drafted him, he lost his brother in a hiking accident. He and his family were out hiking. He literally stepped off the back of the cliff.
Oh, no.
It was the most outrageous thing in the world, so outrageously emotional. So I had this unbelievable, sensitive bond with this player for, a number of years. Unfortunately, he had injuries and he was never able to be what he wanted to be in the NFL. But when it was time to release him, it was unbelievably emotional. So there are so many things that you deal with as a GM. It's not just business. I mean, the people that are just business and are very cutting and don't show that empathy and the sympathy, I think those guys are limited as leaders, to be honest with you.
Oh, 100% agreed. And I mean, it's just human nature, right? Like you meet certain people and you wind up rooting for them, but then at the end of the day, you have to make a calculated business decision and not let those emotions get in the way. And I would imagine that that's an incredibly complicated task. Some of the headlines going into this week one, and there are so many, and I am just eating it up, Thomas, as like a news junkie in the NFL space, watching those injury reports and all the people talking to the media now and all the quotes coming out, and can't, it's just so much. Jamar Chase, back at practice. We talked about this on Tuesday, the fact that we thought it was probably just moments away that they would get him a new deal. It feels like a foregone conclusion that that's going to happen. Worth mentioning that the Bengals did sign Joe Burrow to an extension on the first day of the NFL season last year. So they've taken it right up to the wire in the past, and maybe that's what we're looking at. The fact that he was back on the practice field, limited, but like that has to be an indicator of something, right?
Oh, it's an indicator. Like we said on Tuesday, right?
We're
We
good.
talked about the receivers there without going into too much depth. That's a boon for that organization. That is a very big, important part. And we know that obviously, Mr. Brown was really focused on what he needs to do there. He was outspoken about it. Everyone in that organization is waiting for one of, if not the very best receiver to step on the field and unload on this game this week, right? The explosiveness that he brings to the table. Again, what are we going to do with T. Higgins, right? Where is that going to go? That's on their mind, yes, but let's get this cat in play and let's get him operational so that we can kick off with such great momentum in Cincinnati.
Yeah, you don't want to have any reason for a slow start. He's hardly been out there during training camp. Like, let's get a week of practice under our belt. To me, that reads, and I'm glad to hear for you that it's kind of tells you the same, that there's the same signal that like maybe it's like a dotting I's, crossing T's, but like we're going to get there. There were reports in the last couple of days that maybe Jermaine Burton might not be active. Now that's the wide receiver that they drafted, that I know a lot of people in their brain, they're like, okay, this might be the number 3, this year or later in the year. This is the guy that maybe might be the number 2 moving forward. The word redshirt was used in reports. Is that concerning as a general manager? If you're the general manager there and he's not ready to hit the ground running this season. And maybe it's because Andrei Josevich is, familiar with the offense and he's actually good, maybe better than the narrative surrounding him has been in his career. Maybe it's not concerning at all, but where does your brain go when you hear that?
It's not to a point of being that concerned. I mean, usually when you're putting together, in this case, your receiving core, you're thinking about it at a lot of levels, right? You better make sure that 1 and 2 are set. And how important 3 is as a swing guy and also a role starter. That's what we always consider it. When you start thinking about 4, 5, and 6, they're very important, of course. But you keep it in perspective. You don't bang your head against the wall, worry and show worry to the organization or your head coach that you're struggling with this situation, in my opinion.
All right. So not worried about that. How about this? No one's going to worry about this unless you're maybe Russell Wilson and you're slightly offended, whatever. Bo Nix voted team captain in his rookie season by the Broncos, is reportedly the first rookie captain since Floyd Little was for the Broncos, I should say, not just any rookie out there for any team in 1967. So this hasn't happened for a long time for the Broncos. What does this mean? What do you think it says? I mean, people on the outside could be like, well, he's the quarterback. They just gave him a little bit like, hey, here's a C, like good on you, or we're pumping you up for the public. But this is something that I assume is voted on. And they said that they voted him in. So.
Well, it depends. I mean, let's talk about that quickly. Voting, in the end, the head coach is going to decide whether he votes him in or not. To me, this is
he's like counted. Okay, he got the most votes.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think this is great. I'm a big fan of Sean Payton's ability to coach. I think he's one of the very best out there. Obviously, there's a little bit of screw you probably to all the naysayers out there. Like, really, this guy's a little bit older. Is he a guy who's just a system guy? No, this is categorical for Sean Payton to say to everyone, this cat's ready to lead our football team. I am going to be with him. I'm going to be behind him. This is another indication that I am behind this guy and he's mature. And let's go. And I love it. I love the idea that a head coach and George Payton as a GM are in on this, and they believe no better way to kick this off with our rookie. He's going to take some knocks. There's no question about it. But let's make him believe that we believe in him, which they do. I love the move.
He'll kick off his NFL career, Bo Nix will, along with the Broncos in Seattle Sunday in the afternoon window, one of 4 games in that window. Let's get into some of those games right now, Thomas. I want to find out which games we're the most excited to watch this season. I know that Sumer does a lot of work and is known for being a destination in the off season, right? Free agency advice for the fans to listen to, but also for teams, what they should do in the draft. This is the wheelhouse. So now that the off season is done, let's put a button on that, kind of recap the off season, and with that frame, point people's attention toward week 1 and some of the more interesting games, some of them a little bit under the radar. It's a little segment that I am calling for today. Tune in for what? Now, this is kind of a shout out for your Atlanta days, Lil Jon. Tune in for what? Dun, 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 dun.
Nice. Okay.
I don't know if you
Okay.
got that when I sent it to you.
I got it. I didn't comment on it only because,
You
I
thought it was
knew that you
cheesy.
were on the front end. No, it was great. It was great. It was
Okay.
for you.
Okay.
Yep.
Tune in for what? What are we tuning in for, Thomas? Give me one game. If you could only watch one game this weekend, which one is the one that you are circling, you are carving out time for? This is the one for you.
Let's talk Rams versus the Lions.
That's a good one.
Let's talk about it at a lot of levels here because I have some questions for you as well on this level. This is important. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
So let's think about this. Two guys, one guy I worked with, Les Snead, of course, as a general manager. Let's just start with the executives here for a minute.
Okay.
So you have Les Snead, Brad Holmes. Brad Holmes worked for Les. He, I don't say he idolizes Les, but he has a great deal of respect for him. He learned a lot from Les. They'd made big trades early on in their time. This is their third game together, right? Playing against each other as general managers. That is a really interesting thing for me when I think about that. You're going to play your mentor or your mentor's coming to play you, right? Because it is in Detroit. So Les is bringing Cali all the way. SoCal. He's coming in, cool cat, doing what he's doing. F them picks, all the stuff about Les. He's got Kara Henderson, great wife. She's behind him all the way. She's pumping him along the way. They go in, meet with their old GM, Brad Holmes, in Detroit. Very different scene in Detroit, right? Honestly, Brad Holmes was talking about sunglasses the other day. Did you hear that whole thing? Fun story. Brad's on the styling side. There are two GMs. I don't want to get too far off on this. Two GMs with really interesting approaches in their personal lives, but also in their team building lives, right? How they build. I would ask you right now, categorically, Lindsay Rhodes.
Okay.
Who is the most effective GM of those two?
Are you taking Holmes and Snead?
I'm talking just the two, mentor and student.
You can't put me on the spot. That's like choosing between children. I think that they're both amazing in such totally different ways. I'm a huge fan of Les Snead and what he has been able to pull off in Los Angeles in a bunch of different ways, and I think that this is important from a Sumer standpoint, how committed he is to throwing the old way of thinking out the window if he thinks that that's appropriate. Like, he's impressed me in his ability to just say, like, I don't know, let's evaluate that. We've always done it that way. Should we continue to do it that way? He doesn't just do things just because they've always been done that way. And I think that that's brilliant. I love the fact that he's willing to reinvent the wheel if the wheel does need reinvention.
Love Les that way. Let me just comment on that. I agree with you. He has been on the edge of it all. He is a good to great reader in many, many levels. We talk about that all the time. I mean, Les is always interested in learning more about how he wants to put things together. And I believe Brad Holmes, the GM of the Lions, learned a lot from him that way, right? He may not be as edgy as Les is, but he learned a lot and he believes in what he does, which I think is unbelievably important for a general manager. You can have a very good eye as a general manager, as a team builder, but if you don't have the confidence and the swagger that you need to go along with your head coach, then you're kind of a sidebar. And I think it minimizes what you can do as far as your team building. We could stay there a lot, but I want to segue.
Are you wait? You've alluded to this several times. I need to go back. Are you alluding to the fact that Brad Holmes has that swagger? Like, is that where you're going with this? You said the sunglasses comment, and now you're like, because Lord knows Campbell has got a lot of swagger. You sound like you're a fan of Brad Holmes outside of football.
This guy, man, he is owning it in Detroit. You know that. He is walking around in Big D like everyone is behind him. They love what he's done there, along with the kneecap fucker. This is what they do there. They kick ass there in Detroit. Everyone loves Dan Campbell for what he is, and they really, really do like Brad. They both have built really good teams. Back to Les and Brad quickly. Let's talk about Brad Holmes after we just finished lauding Les. Brad has a really good and firm understanding of what his head coach wants. They have ostensibly one of the best rosters. Now, look, I keep that in perspective. The roster is one thing. Winning games and doing what you need to do is a different part of it all, right? You're putting organizations together. We've seen some great rosters out there who haven't really surfaced in being, basically great winners, right?
Mhm.
But what they're doing there right now is they are winning, and they are classified as one of the best out there. That's what I'm interested in seeing. I'm also interested in seeing, back to rosters, what Detroit has done with their offense. We know that, right? An offensive line who kicks butt, no question about it. Love watching that O-line. We know what they're doing with the receiver group. We know they have two running backs, and we love their rookie from last year, right? Did you pick him in fantasy? I don't even know if you did, but
Amonra?
he, I think when you look at some of these guys and what they've done there, I love what they're doing on offense. I 100% love defenses, but what Brad Holmes has done there, I think, is really exciting. And how are they going to fare? How are the Rams going to fare with that big time power that they have? I'm going to
Right.
tell you right now, however, I
What?
don't know why. I always step back and I wonder, when will things fall off with Jared Goff? Give him his
Oh,
credit. He has done some really good stuff in this league. You know what I mean? He's
yeah.
performed very well. There's
Uh-huh.
just something that's always out there that he's going to be a guy for me. No disrespect at all, because he's accomplished. Every year he's going to have to prove that his arrow is up and
Yeah.
not static.
I don't know if this is fair. You tell me if you think it's not. We had the Sam Darnold conversation on Tuesday, and I talked about people who thrived in specific ecosystems that maybe were not elite quarterbacks. And I wonder if Jared Goff isn't a guy who kind of fits that bill. Somebody who's been in very, very good situations and is good enough. But if he had been in a bad situation, we wouldn't have thrown him away a few years ago.
Is Jared Goff, in your mind, a top 10 quarterback?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Without
Okay.
a list in front of me, like to get into the minutia of like who's 9 or who's 10 or whatever, but just off the top of my head, when you're thinking about the top quarterbacks in the NFL, I'm thinking of the guys who are the guys who can step into almost any situation and elevate the play of everybody around them. And fairly or unfairly, I don't know that that's how I view Jared Goff. I think he's a highly competent, probably above average quarterback who, if you give him good pieces around him, will look very good, and you can win with him and probably even win a Super Bowl with him, I think.
We
So, but I don't
Yeah.
think he's like, in that tier of like Patrick Mahomes, or like I don't think he's a game changer himself.
But that's been always a discussion that we've had, and we have as general managers within our organizations and outside, right? Hey, was Matt Ryan a top 5 in his heyday, in his best day? When he won the MVP, was he a top 5? Was he a top 8? Where is Kirk Cousins right now? We'll be talking about Atlanta in a little bit, hopefully, but where is Kirk Cousins as compared to a guy like Jared Goff? Is it that much of a difference? Is it 25 to 15 between the two? Or is it nudging up against each other? And the reason I bring that up is because your quarterback can have the requisite skills to be a top 10 quarterback, but when it comes to cutting time, so to speak, you know, where is he? How is he going to deal with things, right? All of those traits that he has, does he rise to the occasion, or is he more of a midliner as far as when it really becomes tough? Because I'm a big believer, as a quarterback, you better win the big games, which he's won big games, sure, but you have to win the big games to be considered the elite world for sure in that position.
I think it's funny that you're bringing up specific numbered rankings in terms of how you're framing quarterbacks too, because I feel like in a lot of ways, I've always been disinterested in those conversations because they feel a little bar roomy where there is no right answer and like you can make an argument for anybody. I think of quarterbacks, I think in tiers. And so I don't need to discern from anyone in this tier. All of the quarterbacks here are really, really good and you can make an argument for all of them. But I wonder if in your world, where you're trying to slot people from a price point standpoint, you're trying to rate them in that sense so that you can build your roster like that. Do you think that that's why you're thinking of them in terms of numbers?
Oh, hey, there's no question. For the listeners, for you, in the NFL, GMs, head coaches, personnel men, it is all about stack busting. It is all about comparatives. That's what we do. It's what we've grown up doing as scouts. We're always trying to stack. Here's a group of 10 defensive corners, right? Let's see how we can play that out. Top quarterbacks, how are we ranking them? So it does come up a lot. That's how we speak oftentimes. I'm not talking about the rankings about what the media might say. I'm talking about truly, if I were to look at 20 quarterbacks in the league, where does Jared Goff end? up? Is he a 20, 19, 18, 25, or 15? Or is he 9, 8, 9, 10, 11? That, who knows? This year, to me, is going to be a big indicator as they have the roster around him, how he's going to rise to the occasion. And later in the year, you're going to call me out on it. You're going to say, what is he now, Thomas? What do you truly think he is? Do I think he's a 15-ish? Yes, I do. Do I think he's a top 10? No, respectfully, I don't.
Yeah, I agree with that. Plus, by the way, there would be some quarterbacks you'd probably throw into that mix that people would take over Goff in a vacuum because of their traits. Like if I'm going to roll the dice on and this might not be an example you agree with, but like an Anthony Richardson, right? Who's just so extreme in some ways. Like if he can stay on the field, then now do you have somebody who's so extremely talented that, that's the guy that's going to get you to the goal line in a way where there's more value added than somebody like a Jared Goff. And maybe that's not the case, but that's a really interesting conversation. So I'm going to have to I'm going to have to start thinking in rankings and numbers so that we can have these conversations, Thomas. I always thought that was.
Look, be very clear about this. Jared Goff has gotten him to amazing levels, right? So wherever he is, he has done the things that have been expected and beyond for a lot of us out there, right? I mean, look, for the Rams, you don't think it's like, oh my gosh, that's pretty amazing what he did, leaving them thinking, all right, he's going to go there and maybe less. I'm not saying less felt he fleeced Brad Holmes, but it may have been like, we're moving on. People don't move on from a quarterback. Back to this, right? When Howie Roseman didn't move on from Carson Wentz because he thought, hey, this guy's still a top 5 or 10 quarterback. He did not. Those are big moves by GMs. When you move on from your quarterback, you want to talk about putting yourself out there. That is a hangout in the middle of nowhere. It takes a lot of cojones to do that. It's not easy to do that.
He went to the perfect situation, though, in terms of a franchise that, in my opinion, just was like in that sweet spot. He struck gold in terms of where they were in terms of building a culture that I think is game changing for Detroit. Like just hit him right there on the up and up, in my opinion. So that's the primetime game on Sunday, Rams Lions, and for sure will be one of the most fascinating games of the week. One of the games that I am going to highlight here does not fall into that category. Like most of you guys are going to go like, what? This is a game that you're interested in seeing? It's Patriots Bengals. And the thing that I'm most excited to watch here, Thomas, is the Patriots. And this is a peek inside my brain and how I work in week 1, right? So they've got a new coach. They've got a new way of doing things, Patriot way, out the window. He's made that clear. How will they look? I've heard Gerard Mayo talking about identity. I don't know what theirs is. It's a blank slate in so many ways. We don't know what they're going to do schematically. We don't know who their playmakers are going to be. Last year, Thomas, their leading receiver in yards had 561. That was 78th most in the NFL. There were 15 tight ends and 2 running backs that had more receiving yards than that. And you know who their leading receiver was in terms of catches? Would you like to take a guess?
No.
You're not going to get it. You could guess like probably 6 different people, and I don't think that you would get the right answer. It was Ezekiel Elliott with 51. They were the only team in the NFL whose receptions leader was a running back, and an aged running back at that, though it was real close in Pittsburgh between George Pickens and Jaylen Warren. That's a separate story. I have no idea who their target leader is going to be this year. Will it be Demario Douglas? Will it be one of the rookies that they drafted? And then there is this for this particular game, Alex Van Pelt and Jacoby Brissett. This is not their first time together. They were together in 2022 in Cleveland. You know who they played in Cleveland that year? The Bengals. They won with Jacoby Brissett at the helm, 32-13. So they are a little bit familiar with this team. Plus, the Bengals have been slow starters since Burrow has been there, 6-7-1 in the month of September. I realize that this is the first training camp that he's played every single snap. It's a totally different story, but still, Jamar Chase has not practiced until this week. Patriots are, and I know we don't talk betting on this show, but they're the biggest dogs of the week. But the reason that I think that this is fascinating is because I think they're the biggest dogs, largely because we know so little about them. So what if they come out and they look better than expected? And even if they don't, we're going to learn so much. And that's all I'm about in week 1. So sign me up, 1:00 window. I'm there.
Elliott Wolf, the new general manager of the New England Patriots, right? Not answering to a power hitter head coach like it used to be in New England.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about that. I'm always going to be looking to the executives and say, okay, here's Elliott's first chance to go in. He's not starting his rookie quarterback, right? There are many other moves that he made there. Elliott, as those may or may not know, son of famed Hall of Famer. Is that what you say? Ron Wolf, team builder extraordinaire. So he's got a
Yep.
lot of background. He's
I
got an
agree.
excellent eye. However, how is it going to be judged? Because this fan base in New England, I mean, their expectations are huge. They have been huge for a long time. What are they expecting? How are they going to jump on board or not jump on board with this? So, to me, back to my mind going, okay, what am I thinking as a first-time general manager? What do
Mm-hmm.
I need from my head coach as a general manager in Gerard Mayo and the team that we've put together? How is it going to make me feel comfortable going into game 2? Or am I still wondering how this is all going to come together, right? This is something that would be on a first-time general manager's mind.
There is a part of me though that thinks that like in terms of pressure, I think that the pressure is off to a degree because yeah, the Patriots have high expectations, but the last couple of years have kind of brought those down a little bit, right? Like they've not been particularly competitive for the last couple of years. And so now everybody knows that they're rebuilding and that at the very least they're just hoping like can it be better than it was last year? Are we on to something? Are we potentially building something that we can get excited about for the future? And so I think that they're set up to come out of the gate and only exceed expectations because I think expectations are so low for this particular Patriots team at this very, very moment. And I think that that's a really interesting place to be in narratively. And this is the TV person in me, right? Like I mean, maybe it's not, maybe it's just the NFL. Weird things happen. And sometimes you just get a feel for like, I don't know, doesn't this feel like this could be the game where everyone is like, this is not going to happen at all. And the Bengals are clearly the class of this game. And then you show up on Monday and everyone is going, what is wrong with the Bengals? And oh my God, the Patriots. Like I could just see it happening. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm not in the prediction business. I'm just like, I have this like weird feeling. The more that I did research into this game, I was like, am I like feeling the Patriots? And I don't want to come down on that side of the equation just yet. That feels a little out there. What's another game that you are looking forward to this week? Circle one for me.
Look, I have 2 games, but one, let's talk about the 49ers and let's talk about the Jets. Of course, we know where that's going. We know what we're trying to do. We want to see ostensibly someone who has been talked about as being overrated,
Yeah.
i.e., in San Francisco with Mr. Purdy, and against a guy who is coming off a big injury, and again, who, by the way, everyone's excited about. We want to see what he's going to do. Excited about seeing, does he pull through? I know that's the obvious discussion on it, but what those 2 quarterbacks do for the respective teams is unbelievable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you think Brock Purdy is overrated or not, or whether Mike Florio does and Chris Sims, that's beside the point, right? I only bring those 2 up because when you listen to them, it's a pretty interesting conversation. I would say myself, there are so many great things about this quarterback, and there are other things to keep in perspective. This comes back to what I said yesterday, the fact that you have a head coach out in San Francisco who knows how to use his talent through and through. He's maximizing. And then, you flip it over and, you look at Aaron Rodgers. This is someone who is going to come in there. They're playing out in San Francisco. He went to Berkeley. I mean, when you think about that, his world is out there. There's a lot going on there. Is there going to be distractions extraordinaire? There's distractions to
Yes.
me, pull back. To me, it was it will be a potentially distractive laden lead up to the game and game, because we have all kinds of things going in San Francisco right now with the re-signings and the Brandon Ayuk and where
Right.
Deebo Samuels is and where Trent Williams. Like, there's a lot going on there with injuries, with Pearsall getting shot down in Union Square. Like, who would have ever thought about
I
that?
know.
Over to the Chiefs, or the Chiefs, over to the Jets. We can talk about Aaron Rodgers all we want to talk about. We talk about, again, Joe Douglas coming in there. What's on his mind? His mind's on there. His mind is definitely on what's going on with his quarterback. It's on everything else there. How is his head coach going to come in? Is his head coach going to step up and be the head coach that was expected? Is he going to start winning games? Is he going to manage the roster that they ostensibly have at the Jets, which of course is lauded as being a very talented roster as well? How are these guys going to come in and do that on the Jet side, and how are they going to deal with some of the distractions right now in San Francisco? Game one. The other thing I'd ask you, who do you think's more ready? And I'm talking about do you believe in winning preseason games? And do you believe you have to hit stride
No.
in game one, or you think you can ease in?
I don't know about easing in so much because I mean you can never approach a win or a loss, right? Like at the end of the season, I think they're all going to need as many of those as they can possibly get. So but I do think preseason, I don't care about the results of preseason. And in some cases, I don't even care about what I'm seeing. It's just like extra practice reps. This has become a big story in the last few years with Twitter, where people are tweeting out live play-by-play of someone's completion percentage at practice, and I think a lot of people have made this point very smartly. Like, practice is where you should be trying things that you might not be good at. Like, there might be something like that that's happening. You could do that in the preseason too, for all I care. If you're just like, something we need to work on here that is not our strength, let's try it against some live reps. And so what if people are watching? Who cares? Like, get better. That's the whole point of it.
I have been around football for my entire life. My dad was a coach, he was a scout, and I've been around it, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. I've seen the ups and downs of preseason games. I've seen exhibition games. We used to call them in the CFL when my dad was coaching up there. I've seen it, right? I've seen it as a GM. I've seen it as a scout, as a personnel director. To me, it's contingent on where you are as an organization, whether you should push to win games and be dialed in the preseason. And I have been in situations where Dan Quinn, who I love, how I love him. I think he's fantastic. I'm so excited for him to get another chance. We had some ups and downs in our preseasons, and sometimes that can affect the morale and the belief in your team. And it takes a while to get back into the regular season when you've lost 3 games or 4 games. Everyone's like, no one cares about the preseason. I cared about the preseason. I wanted to see operation. I wanted to see consistency. I wanted to see effort. I did not want to see injuries. I get that. So all I'm saying, a little aside, is you can have certain teams out there that believe in it. I love the fact that Coach Harbaugh in Baltimore is all about winning all the time. I love that. I think his record in the preseason has been unbelievable. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but it is a message sender in my mind.
That's an interesting, yeah, that's one way to look at it. And I think that there's a lot of validity to that, certainly. The Aaron Rodgers thing that I'm most interested to see, aside from like, will he stay healthy? Like, obviously, is what he looks like, because I think a lot of people are just plugging him in and saying he's the Aaron Rodgers Hall of Famer that we know from a handful of years back. But the last time we saw him in a full season, he was not particularly good. And I think that, there might be reasons that was the case in Green Bay. But I'm a big, like, if the last taste that I have in my mouth is a negative one, I feel this way about Josh Jacobs a little bit, going to Green Bay. Like, there are certain people where I'm like, I don't know, we're just giving them the benefit of the doubt because a couple of years ago that they were good. We assume that they're still going to be good. And I am wondering that with regards to Aaron Rodgers, his EPA per play in 2022, no bueno.
Mm-hmm. No
that was
bueno.
The first, yeah, last time we saw him, he ranked 25th in that particular category.
Have the Jets done enough on their offensive side? That's on my mind as well. Will Aaron come in, and will he be disappointed if he leads that game off and he realizes he doesn't have the firepower he needs? That's not easy, right? People like that, when I say people like that, his expectations are high. He's got a particular side to him, his personality. He wants things to be the way he wants it to be. I'm not holding that against him. That dude is in charge, and that's what he wants. And if he's not getting the right firepower, that's putting pressure on the rest of the team. Like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here as far as how we built the team? And did you listen to me enough? I'm wondering if he said that in his mind or not, about how
something tells me he would feel comfortable saying that.
I think he probably would. And I, as a general manager, it's funny. I would listen to my head coach, of course. I would listen to my quarterback on certain elements. We would talk about things in the off season. This wasn't about taking shots at his teammates. It was about talking about what we needed at certain position levels and what we truly needed to take it to another level in the offensive scheme that we are going to be playing. And how are we going to beat the living crap out of our division opponents? Like, these are all things that are always on our mind. And I'm sure they're on Aaron's mind.
100%. And by the way, in that particular case, I don't agree with all of his opinions that he states very, very loudly all over the place. But in that particular case, if you brought Aaron Rodgers in to be your quarterback, you sure as shit better listen to him. Because if I am 100% confident that there are few quarterbacks in the NFL right now that are more in tune with what their strengths and their weaknesses are and what they think should happen on the football field, the way their brain works. Because ultimately you could go, now we should go in a totally different direction. But if he sees the game in a certain way, how he sees the field, how he's going to read the plays, you gotta build around that, because
My and
you've
my
already put the ball in his hands, right?
You're exactly right. 100%. My only agreement, not disagreement, my only caveat is when I'm going in and I'm sitting down as a general manager with Aaron Rodgers or anyone as a quarterback who's got a really strong opinion, I will sit down with him and I will be very clear what my expectations are as far as publicly making it sound like he's running the team. I would never have that. I have old school to me that way. I would
Yeah,
sit down and say, we're going to share everything. But when we go out in the public, you're the
please.
quarterback of this team, not the general manager, not the head coach or the owner. You make sure that's a really respectful agreement we'll have. I will laud you up and down as a quarterback and what you are. But please don't ever come across like you are overshadowing the team builders on the team, because it's not the way it is. It will never be that way.
That's a different leadership trait to discuss, right? Like feeling confident enough. And maybe that's just feeling confident that you're being heard. And if you are confident that you're being heard and your advice is being taken, you don't necessarily feel the need to go say that so
No,
publicly.
and that's exactly right. And again, Aaron Rodgers, you were talking about, a stat a minute ago. I get that. If he comes back healthy, I still think he has so much to him, and I think he can turn it upside down in a great way. And again, there's something about him that I've always really taken a liking to as far as having that quarterback lead. And I know he's got a personality sometimes that might rub people, maybe because I don't get the taking the trips and whatever the legit trips that he took were. I wasn't that guy, but he does understand, the working on the brain and the working
Yep.
through a lot of things that I do appreciate with a guy like that. He's much deeper than the average person, which is appreciated from my point of view.
Yeah, on the field has been one of my favorite quarterbacks. My last game, the first one that I mentioned, had the second lowest Sumer watchability rating of the week. So for my next game, I'm going to go with the second highest, Thomas, just to prove that I'm not a contrarian. And that is Packers Eagles. Two good teams that had opposite trajectories at the end of the season last year. Eagles started awesome, fell apart down the stretch. Packers got better and better and better, finished so strong. Can they pick up where they left off? Can the Eagles not pick up where they left off? We all know about Kelsey being gone. Will they ditch the brotherly shove? Will Devontae Smith go nuts in Kellen Moore's offense? How about the defense, though? That's where I want to put your attention. This was a weakness last year for Philadelphia. Bottom 6 in EPA per play, success rate, EPA per pass, passing yards, passing touchdowns. Everyone who plays fantasy knows that this was a team that you wanted to start your wide receivers against. They made a massive effort this offseason to upgrade their coverage unit. They used their top 2 draft picks on cornerbacks. They brought back CJ Gardner-Johnson. They made a couple of smaller moves to bolster the unit as well. They brought in Vic Fangio to run the defense. This looks like a team to me that knew exactly what their Achilles heel was last year and threw a bunch of resources at fixing it. And what a fascinating matchup for them to test that unit against a very good but young and somewhat undefined passing offense of the Packers. You've got Jordan Love, who was number 1 in the NFL in EPA and completion percentage over expectation post week 12 last season. That's bonkers. But who will emerge as his most trusted wide receivers? I've talked a ton this offseason about Dontavian Wicks as a guy who I think has wide receiver 1 traits, very good success rate versus man and press. I think he could be very good for them on the outside in a way that maybe is a little bit sneaky this year. Jaden Reed feels like a lock to be a big part of the offense. You've also got Christian Watson. You've got Romeo Doubs. You've got Luke Musgrave. You got Josh Jacobs. Is he still good? He had a rough year last year. I mentioned that already. High total in this game, close line, drama, maybe danger. You've heard all of the Brazil stories. I'm super excited for this game in primetime on Friday. Speaking of the Brazil stories, by the way, did you see? So Darius Slay, made a comment about not wanting to go to Brazil and he didn't feel safe and he since apologized. Darius Slayton from the Giants had one of my favorite tweets of the week. He tweeted, to everyone in Brazil. This is Darius Slayton. I am a Giants wide receiver. I am innocent. Like, don't come at me.
I did not realize that. I mean, I've been hearing more about it. Like, you think about that, you think about those guys. The more I hear about people talking about going to those international games, certain organizations are much more open. Do your thing, enjoy it, but we're here to play football ultimately. Some don't enjoy your thing, don't leave the building. It's not safe. And let's just play this game and get the heck back to the United States, right? So anyway, I want to go back to what you're talking about. However, with when you're talking about Jordan, can we talk about Jordan Love for a minute?
Let's.
I mean, let's talk about it from your perspective.
Okay.
Was last year what you expected of him? Do you think his arrow up is a legit arrow straight up, or is it still jury's out at certain levels? I'm very curious from your perspective.
Well, we're just answering questions with questions. What would be the reason that you would not be sold on him down the stretch? Is there something that you would feel like you have not seen yet? Because we saw him in big games. We saw him. There were certain things at the beginning of the year in terms of like time to throw and like some of the, I want to say it was like sack rates. Like there were a few things at the beginning of the year that I remember taking notes about and going, I don't know, man, this feels concerning to me. And then all of a sudden it wasn't. And like monitoring those kinds of stats on a weekly basis, there was a certain point where I was like, hey guys, they're doing good, but I think that it looks like it might be a little bit of a mirage and we should expect some of this success to come back down to earth at some point. And then it did, but then it just got sorted out. And all of those things like were fixed, which kind of feels like, you're getting some reps under your belt. You're not making the same mistakes twice. You're learning from them. All of that feels like a good sign to me.
The reason I ask the questions with the questions, because you put me on the spot a couple of times with some of these games, and only because they weren't games on my radar. And I'm like, Lindsay, like really good analysis of it. And you've got me now stirred that you've now, generated some attention for me on these games that I was thinking, I'm going to skip through them. I'll watch the recaps. And I bring up Jordan Love is because, Jordan Love prior to last year and the start, which wasn't, monumental, right? I was like, all right, let's see where we are. Remember, as a former general manager, we're cynical and skeptical until we're proven otherwise, right? There's always like, we always keep the worst case scenario in our mind sometimes. What if, oh my gosh, what if we did draft the wrong player years ago? And what if he doesn't follow in line with Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers or whatever it may be, taking time? What if this doesn't materialize that way? And I'm still, even though he finished off as strongly as he did, I still want to see what he has to do this year. Consistency, right? Consistently, and consistency as a monitoring element. It needs to be proven to me that this is a long-term deal for him. I never, prior to those earlier years when he was coming out, I had my concerns about Jordan in certain ways. We all know. I mean, where was he? My questions were, where was he truly as a leader of the football team? Because that quarterback needs to be that. Jordan has all kinds of, we're talking about requisite traits. This guy has got all kinds of great traits. However, it is a full package thing. Where is he with that? That's what I'm still waiting to see. And the way that Brian Gutekunst approaches this, along with LaFleur, who was with us here in Atlanta, and Matt has his really good, strong idea of what he's going to do. I think they're getting the most out of this quarterback. Where is his level? We were talking about 15 when we were asking a little bit earlier. Can you here we go, Stack Buster, the new Stack Buster. Where do you put him in that? Can you make a call on Jordan Love right now after basically a half of season where he was thriving?
I mean, I suppose that the answer to that is no, and you always want the largest possible sample size, but I feel fairly confident just based on, me, right? I'm not an evaluator. You are. Like I would never presume to tell you, what the answer to any of these questions are. I found my stats from early October about what my concerns were last year. Mm-hmm. And this was post week 4. I noted that he led the league in percentage of throws to his first read, which alone isn't necessarily a bad sign. Had the lowest completion percentage for a 4-game starter at that point. And I thought that this was interesting, his pressure rate was the lowest in the league for a 4-game starter, and yet his time to throw was the 23rd fastest. So he was throwing to his first read, not under pressure, and still taking a long time relatively to get the ball out. And so I wondered if he just wasn't seeing the field. There were, some he wasn't a rookie, but you know what I mean? Like rookie quarterback types of feels that I was getting from him. But then by the end of the season, like I said, all of that stuff kind of fixed itself. And so I find it appealing that the arrow just continued to point up throughout the entire season. And then at the end of the year with a very young group of guys, like you're looking at wide receivers there that he'll get a chance to build with. And from a roster building standpoint, that's got to be appealing too, right? Like that he's kind of aligned with some of those people.
Lindsay, so if you were on our scouting staff, right?
Okay.
Our scouts would say, "Oh, I know where Thomas is going with this." And I ask you categorically, not for the dialogue around it, but categorically, what number, back to stack busting, you didn't give me a number. What number do you think he is approximately? Just with nothing else around it. Oh, I'm putting you on the spot on there because
I think I haven't seen enough to know.
And that's where I'm going with this. It is very difficult to do that, right? I am going there with that. I'm not expecting you to say he's at 12 or he's at 11, but I am saying, when we get into talking about this inside the buildings, we have these talks, and my expectations as a GM were no, not I don't know, or maybe tomorrow, and I got all this dialogue. I'm not saying that about you. That's the conversation that we have, and they're not easy. So when the outside people in the public think, oh, they should be able to figure this out, they're not easy answers, right? Like I look back, it's way off topic. When we signed Vic Beasley to the 5th year, thinking that there were so many things. Most people say, why sign Vic Beasley? He completely tailed off after the 16 year when he led the league in sacks. He sucked after that. You shouldn't even have thought about it. Well, there were a lot of elements to that you have to think about before you decide whether you're going to sign someone, whether you're going to rank someone back to ranking. When it comes time to sign that big deal for these quarterbacks, where do you truly see him? Where is he in that stack and where is he not? And where would you, back to the puke point, right, Lindsay? Where do you go? Where do you truly go where you're like, we have to have an ulterior plan, right? But where do you go? So I'm not putting you on the spot to ask you about that. I am only saying to show that there is a little bit of discomfort that way, having those categorical answers are not that easy all the time.
Yeah. Their puke point was pretty high because they gave him a new deal and it was 55 per, tied with Joe Burrow.
That's a big one. Yeah. Oh yeah. So my last question on that is, that's not a question. You're sick of my questions today. I can tell.
Never.
But 55, Brian Gutekunst's another one. Oh my gosh. What would happen if this what if mentality that a lot of GMs have? What if he comes out and he flails around and he's not a $55 million quarterback? That's you put yourself up there. When we signed Matt Ryan to $30 million, remember, biggest contract ever in the history of the world at that point, quickly after it went beyond. But you want to talk about the pressure that you have going in those seasons. You're like, whoa, I love this guy. He has changed our organization, but God help me. The last thing I want is for him to come out and have a downward descending arrow.
Well, that's what Andrew Berry has dealt with emotionally for the last couple of years because he paid that and it has not, outside of like a few moments here or there, looked like a smart investment. Okay, getting back to the games, you have one more that I know that you have circled on your calendar.
I have one more. I know we're coming to the end of the show and everything. It is Atlanta and it's Pittsburgh. It's Pittsburgh at Atlanta, of course. Many levels to this, not only because it's a former team and because I always say that I'm not going to put my emotion into it. And every year, of course, my emotions into it at a certain level. I'm looking at the former head coach of the Atlanta Falcons coming in as a coordinator, Arthur Smith, going against Raheem Morris, a former coach with us here with Dan Quinn, coming back, being the head coach in Atlanta. I want to see how those two tee off against each other. I want to see, of course, the quarterback situation. Unbelievable. You have one quarterback situation in Pittsburgh where, we're talking about Russell Wilson. I think I saw the stat. It was 19th in EPA play, right? Last year, I think. 21st in quarterback rating. If you subscribe to that, they decided to go with him over Fields. We talked about that a little bit the other day, or we have had discussions about that coming in. Does Arthur Smith have a really good plan about how he's going to play Russell Wilson, how he's going to play a tight end that I think he probably likes more than maybe he likes, and I don't want to stir the pot, but maybe likes more than the guy that he drafted in Kyle Pitts. Kyle's an outside athletic guy. Pat
He's
Fryermuth
a
will
blocker.
block. Yeah, and he'll catch, and he's got that well-rounded side to him. Not saying that Pitts isn't a fantastic athlete. How he comes in, how much does Arthur Smith truly know about the team now as it stands, right? That's on your mind. I heard Mike Tomlin saying something like, we won't get into talking about what Arthur Smith is going to share with the team on what he knows about his former team. No question they do. They do it upside down and around and around. There is no question in my mind. The biggest game in his mind right now coming in is to beat the Atlanta Falcons. And there's no question that Russell Wilson wants to show the world he can still play and he's not descending. And then, oh, by the way, what about Kirk Cousins? I mean, does he come in? Is he still thinking, gosh, I hope I am truly healthy? And how much is this young cat nipping at my heels if I don't do as well as is expected?
There's a lot of mental middle fingers happening in this game, right?
That's
like Arthur Smith to the team that fired him, Russell Wilson wants to prove to everybody, right? Like it's not specific about the Falcons, but that's in his mind. He's got a chip on his shoulder. Some of the Falcons probably do about Arthur Smith. Like, look at what I can do when someone throws me the ball. Like there's probably some components of that. This is a fascinating game. I totally agree with you. And then you've also got that coaching staff that you mentioned for the Falcons coming from the Rams. Right. And so a lot of talk about whether or not they're effectively going to run the Rams offense. And what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? It's so different from what Arthur Smith's done there for the last few years.
And you're talking about a roster. There is no question in my mind what Raheem and Terry Fontenot has done with that roster. There are some marquee players there. They've had the opportunity to pick high. I get it. And so there should be a very talented team there, and they have done that. That's a talented offense. They have some talent on the defense. They've gotten creative with it. I mean, kudos to the organization and Arthur Blank ultimately for saying spend. We saw what he spent. I mean, they'll always spend in the top 2, 3, 4, or 5, right? That's just what we always did in Atlanta. That's not going to change. And I've told you this before. I don't know you personally. Arthur Blank gives back to that organization more than any or more than most in this league. He wants it for the city. He is a proud Atlanta person. He wants to give back. He wants to win, of course, but he wants to provide the best he can for the head coach and the GM. That is a major prop there. I'm not getting anything out of it. Arthur is never going to hire me again. Don't get me wrong. I am just saying it is a very big laud for Arthur that way because he does step out and provide. That's a big deal.
The last game that I'm going to circle, I'm having a hard time narrowing this one down, Thomas. There's so many games. Is it Broncos Seahawks? Is it Raiders Chargers? Is it Titans Bears? If I could only watch one of those games this week, which one would I'm going to go Titans Bears. Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to watch the other ones later because I'm fascinated to see all of the newness that's taking place in those games that I just mentioned. I'll scan the box. I have to see Titans Bears live because of the Bears, largely. Caleb, everybody knows how I feel. Taylor Swift heart hands, that'll trigger some people. Wide receivers, defense was pretty good by the end of the year last year. Jalen Johnson, all of it. The reasons to want to watch the Bears are obvious, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. The Titans less so. But if you are just going off what the Titans looked like last year, this looks like a great game for Caleb to start against. The secondary there in Tennessee, worst in some ways than that Eagles secondary that I talked about earlier. They had the lowest interception rate in the league, Thomas, but this is not the same Titans secondary that they rolled out last year. They made quite a few changes. They brought in Chidobe Awuzie. They brought in L'Jarius Sneed, both of those at corner. Interestingly, they brought in a couple of safeties who have played together in Seattle, in Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs, buying low on them, banking that we'll see a little bit of a bounce back there. It's a much more experienced defensive backfield. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on the importance of what they did there in bringing in people that were familiar with one another in a unit, like the pairing of Adams and Diggs. Do you think that was purposeful, that they were like, hey, they are familiar with kind of playing with one another and knowing how to read and like get on the same page? Or do you think that just happened to happen because they were both available and the best available at the positions that they wanted to upgrade?
I think people are always thought out that way. And I think they would think about, oh, by the way, the sidebar, the positive sidebar is their familiarity. Gosh, that's horrible. You know what I'm trying to say.
Familiarity. Yep.
Familiarity. Gosh. Yeah. However, it is the best available. And it is, those types of things, of course, override what you're talking about. But it is a great point because you think about it and you're thinking about that's what you're going to tell the owner, right? You're going to say, hey, we thought about this and we also thought about X, Y, and Z and how we're putting this together. These are all things that I believe for general managers and team builders and the new head coach in one situation and a younger situation, still younger in Chicago. They think about all of these things when they're building their team, right? What is best for the team, which I'm going to ask you, we can go on and on. I'm just being wildly mindful of the time there, yeah. Lindsay. Who is a cooler cat? Come on. You got Ryan Poles, cool cat. You got our guy, Rand Carthon.
Oh, I mean, you can't, like, that's not, I'm extremely biased.
Again with that?
No. I'm saying like that's an unfair edge because I think Rand Carthon's okay. I love Rand Carthon. I think Rand Carthon's just a good dude. Love him. But like, let's say I didn't. Like he is undeniably cool. Right? Like I listened to as I watched his interview that you did with him when you went out to training camp and you sat down with him, and like he just is himself, and like his natural aura is one of confidence, and he kind of knows who he is, and he's just cool. We've talked a lot about who's cool. Like we're gonna have to do some cool rankings when it comes to GM. Who are the coolest GMs? 1 to 10. That's coming this season on the SumerSports show.
We're going to do that. And to your point about Rand, you're right. I think he's in a spot. And when I talked to him during that interview, like what a great spot for him to be. I mean, he can walk around the city of Nashville. And I mean, he's just got that presence about him and he doesn't let things go up and down. So I think that's going to be good for a new head coach. Coach Callahan, love that, by the way. I just want to mention that. I did mention it there. Yes. Rand's going to be really good that way for him. So is his dad, Ryan Callahan. So is Callahan's dad, right? When you think about father-son being able to work together, that's a big deal there. Like, I think I love that. If you only had the opportunity, one of the best O-line coaches in the history of this game is working with his son in his first year. And there's Rand, again, back to cool cat, working it all, keeping it all together. I look, and that's not taking anything away from Ryan Poles. I don't know Ryan that well. I think, by the way, Ryan's got a presence up there. He's a no-nonsense guy. So both of these guys are coming to the table. They'll shake hands in the middle of the field. They'll talk for a couple minutes, I'm sure. I think it's great. I think it's great at a lot of levels. These two guys are pairing off against each other.
Yeah, I do too. You mentioned Callahan, and it reminded me there was a clip making the rounds in the last 24 hours, I want to say, of Callahan that I think was very, very well received by a lot of people in the building there at Sumer, probably, where he talked about EPA per play. And it was like the whole analytics community was like, hard eyes. That's my coach right there. Like, and he knew how to talk about it, and he knew the proper way that it affected, run pass ratio, and what, like, he just sounded like fully bought in and smart. And so I think that for me, that makes me feel, again, like going back to the stuff I said about Les and just being like, what's new that's valuable to me? And I'm not just going to do something because it's old fashioned. I'm stuck in my ways. I am open to learning new tricks. And it was clear in that one clip that Brian Callahan at least checks that box. And we'll see if he can check a whole bunch of other ones on Sunday.
Love it. Great commentary. Thank you.
Thomas Dimitroff. That is week 1. We'll see if we're right about any of these things. I mean, we didn't really predict anything. We just told you what you should watch. So then maybe when we're back here again on Tuesday, we'll, talk about how they looked in some of these ways. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so that as soon as that episode is up, wherever you get your podcasts, it shows up in your podcast feed. Let me point you in the direction of a couple of other SumerSports podcasts that are also worth a look. We've got Stats and Scheme with Sean Syed and Tej Seth, Tuesday and Thursday mornings. We've got Sam Bruckhouse, who has a new podcast, Sumer Daily, just as it sounds, 5 days a week, quick 20-minute breakdowns or so. And so lots of great content coming out here from Sumer as we kick off the 2024 NFL season. Thomas could not be more excited to spend it with you. And thank all of you that are listening right now for spending some time with us. We'll see you again next week.